alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a returning guest and host of his own shows on the internet, Jason LaVelle. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Hey, thank you so much for having me back, Tim. It's great to be here.
Oh yeah, it's always good to have you on the show. Geez, I'm awful. I'm trying to think of a better adjective here, and I couldn't. You're a good adjective.
Yeah, that works. That works for me.
So remind the listeners a little bit about yourself and the sort of stuff you write and your show.
Yeah, I will, and I'll try not to take up too much time because my various things are getting more varied, so they take longer. But so I write horror stories, and I write short stories, and I also write full-length novels. I have a lot of fun with that. Most of them, they're not really slasher, gore-filled horror, anything like that. You know, they're more kind of mess with you a little bit psychologically. You know, there is some stuff that has some extreme violence in it, but you know, I like to toy with people's minds more than I do just spray blood around. So that's what I write. But you know, it really is way different than you know the Jay that most people know in real life, because I am a very kind of gentle, soft-spoken person in the real world, and and so I host several podcasts. I co-host a show called Spilling Ink with Katie Salitis and J.E. Taylor, and we have a great time. It's an author roundtable show. Tim, you've been on the show. You know, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have been on the show. We kind of talk about anything and everything to do with writing, and then a lot of times stuff that has nothing to do with writing at all.
Indeed.
Yeah. You know, and Spilling Ink also has a sister show called The Raven, and The Raven is, you know, it's more of a one-on-one conversation with authors where they're reading a little bit of their story and kind of getting more in-depth with it. And people have really responded well to that. It's a lot of fun. So that's podcast number 2. I have one more. I told you my interests are getting more and more varied here. I also host a show called Unafraid. And Unafraid is completely different. It has nothing to do with the writing or publishing industry. And it's a show about the queer experience, living as a queer person, sharing stories from the LGBTQ community, you know, things that have changed us or shaped us or helped us grow as people. And that is, you know, a show that is very, very near and dear to my heart. It's a show that can be very uplifting. It's a show that can be very intense. So I kind of cover a lot of the spectrum with podcasts. The only thing I don't do is sports, because I don't know anything about sports.
Me neither. Yeah, I'm not a huge sports fan in any way. So yeah,
yeah. I remember my growing up. My stepdad was a big sports guy. He was a big sports nut, and so you know, maybe that's part of the reason I don't care for sports, is because we didn't have a great relationship, and so when I think of sports, I think of him, and yeah, that might be it.
Yeah, you know, I mean, isn't it interesting though how the people you associate with an activity or with a subject can change everything. Like, before I got to 9th grade, I didn't really like any classes in particular, especially not English classes. But in 9th grade and then 12th grade, I had these great English teachers, and now and then I became an English major in college. I mean, that's how my folly was set up.
You know, you hear that kind of thing actually often, especially from writers. You know, because a lot of writers our minds work maybe a little bit differently than most of the population. And a lot of times we have a tough time connecting with teachers or people in school, and so when you find that one teacher or that one person, that it's almost like magic, and it's like, oh wow, this is how I was meant to learn, and it just opens those doors wide open for you.
Yeah, I think it goes double for writers with autism spectrum disorder like me. I mean, I noticed, because I took it was so difficult for me to even hang out with the other kids in school, So having teachers that I could actually identify with in some way was really helpful, just on a social level to some degree. I just felt like they got me more than the other students did, and I got them better than the other students got them. So it worked out. But
yeah, and I think that it's all about personalities and the connection that we can make with certain people. And I was actually telling a coworker today that I was going to be on your show, and talking about how you're just this really cool guy, and I really enjoy talking to you. And I don't have that many guy friends that I just enjoy talking to, so it's nice to be able to find someone that you just chat with, and you don't have to feel pressured to act a certain way.
Oh yeah, pressure is a killer for me, honestly. Like if I felt like I had to do something a certain way, that at least in the past, when I was younger, I would act out 100% of the time, in some way, even if it was just acting a little more childish than I should on occasion, like. But if I feel like I'm stuck somewhere, I don't have much patience for that, and that can be in a conversation if I'm bored, or it could be in a social thing. Like, I mean, I remember being bored at weddings when I was younger. I was like a teenager or a younger kid. Because there's nothing, I mean, let me be honest here. If you're a kid and you enjoy weddings, I don't know what's up. Because there's not much there for me. There was nothing there for me when I was younger. And now I think they're kind of cool as an adult, but yeah. It's just like, I'm just here. I'm here, I'm waiting. It's like it's a 6-hour church service,
Yeah, and it's all the grown-ups, and kids don't care what grown-ups are doing anyway.
Right, exactly. And a bunch of people, and that goes back to me as a kid, like, and then there's all these people I don't know, and that's really not any good either. For me personally, anyway.
Well, and that feeling of being bored, I think that really also relates to people who write long fiction. They're, if you get to a point where you're slogging through a particular passage in a book and you're just like, oh, this is so boring. I just don't want to write this. Well, that can totally kill the creative engine right there.
Hell yes. Yeah, that is a huge problem. And I actually have a way of dealing with that. That I kind of figured out when I was, it's not one that everyone's going to use, and not one everyone can use all the time either. But it is similar to the, just have somebody walk through the door with a gun. But I think that's Raymond Chandler's advice for writing pulp fiction. If you get bored, just have somebody walk through the door with a gun, and you'll figure it out. But in my case, it was like, okay, I thought this story was going this way. Let's just see if we just tweak it so it goes the opposite direction, basically. And that's kind of a useful thing for genre fiction, a useful technique, because it means you're generally still in genre if you go like exactly in reverse. You're reversing the story arc you thought you were going to do. So you're still doing the same theme. You're still using the same tropes. It's just you're going to use them with a different outcome, basically. That's kind of abstract, but in my in the book I just re-released last month, I tried to make it a series of novellas, but this is the first time I really felt that I did this, was that, oh yeah, this book is cruising along and it looks like it's going to become some kind of weird tragedy. And I'm like, well, it's going to involve the disintegration of the main relationship in this story, the main romantic relationship. And I thought, that's kind of not really good for fantasy. Maybe this is the opposite of what I meant by you get to maintain genre, because I thought, like, I wasn't thinking about this consciously, because, mind you, when I wrote this book, I was 19 years old. And the book's now called Orphan Mage, and in the middle of this book, I thought the relationship was going to fall apart when I started it. That's kind of what I'd set it up for, but instead, I twisted it, reinforced the relationship, moved it along to another stage, and then things just got worse. And it was really, I think it worked really well. The readers who are reading that book now seem to like it a lot. So I think it was a good decision. And most importantly, kept me interested in the story.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that's actually a really clever idea, because if you throw a wrench into your own machine, so to speak, it's gonna keep you engaged. And what is it? Oh gosh, was it Hemingway that said, if there's no surprises for the writer, there's no surprises for the reader, something like that.
I don't know if Hemingway said that. That's a great quote,
I'm
though,
not
or
sure.
a great line, regardless. Because I
Well,
think it's true for me. I mean, 100%.
Somebody famous said that, and I like it, but it's also a challenge for me, because I kind of like things to be neat and orderly.
Well, you need to
I
keep
like it
things
when
neat when you're going to do horrible things to your characters. You got to keep things a little neat, just to keep the safety there for yourself.
That's right.
Uh,
That's right. Well, I think that even when writing horror, that people that read things like horror, and I don't think that you're a horror reader. I think you're more fantasy, aren't you?
I'm more of a fantasy writer. I have read some horror, but not a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that there's actually some comfort for the people that read horror in having a little bit of a structure to the plot, and a structure that we're familiar with. Not all the time, and we don't want the same stories, but at least if we're going to have our wits scared out of us, we can know that, okay, this is kind of the way the story's going to go, and I can expect this type of thing to happen in the next scene. So
Yeah. Go
that
on.
doesn't happen for every horror movie or in every horror story, but I know that when I'm stories up a certain way, so I'm trying to maintain that kind of story structure. But then at the same time, you run into that, to be extra conscious of, okay, I've got to make sure I'm not just falling into a pattern with the words as well.
Right. You definitely, I mean, it can't, writing any words can become a slog. It doesn't matter what the story's doing. That's a great point, too. But, it's interesting. I was writing this novella earlier this month, and I did it pretty quickly, but it was like 30,000 words long, It was really good, really fun to write, though. And the weird thing was, it was science fiction. But I'm like, oh, and it was very high weird science fiction, let me put it that way. It's more like fantasy meets science fiction, because that's what I really like in that kind of universe. But I decided to take the tropes from a show that I've been watching that I liked a bunch, which is kind of funny. I'm catching up on The Blacklist. Have you heard of the show? It's like a cop show with an anti-hero protagonist. Kind of cool.
Yeah, I've actually only seen a couple episodes. I haven't seen all of it.
Okay, because this it's like a family saga meets a crime show, basically. It's the overall theme. But one of the things about it is that it uses all these police drama tropes. Like, okay, we're hunting the killer. That's like every episode they're hunting some new target, basically. And, they're FBI, but they're still basically police. They're just, super, creepy police if you think about it too much. Anyway. But the fun part about that show is how it's got this formula to it. That's when the shocking stuff happens and something changes in the formula. It's like, uh-oh. Something's different. It's not every episode has a moment like that, which is what makes it such a standout when that sort of thing does occur. And I like that kind of feel, and I think that goes to what you were saying about horror. You want to have the comfort almost of the structure, so that then you can throw your reader into, I mean, yeah, they're gonna be scared, so you need to shake things for them. And how do you do that if everything is terrifying and crazy? That's not something you can just do. You can't go from 10 to 10. You got to go from a number to 10.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I recently watched a movie it was on Apple Plus, and it's the new Tom Hanks movie, Greyhound. Greyhound's about the convoys of battleships that would, or not battleship, but destroyers or whatever, that would escort these merchant ships, across the ocean during World War II. And there's these epic battles with the U-boats, and all in all, I mean, it's just chock full of amazing action. And I thought the action was wonderful, but at the same time, it was all this action from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't really a story arc. There wasn't really a plot. It was just bam, 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 crazy great action. And I love action movies. Even I, at the end, I was thinking, boy, there wasn't a whole lot of story here. I could have used a little bit more story. So we've got to remember that even if you've got great action scenes, you've still got to have some good story and character development too.
Absolutely. Even in, the classic, like Die Hard, as an action movie, Die Hard, there's still those moments when he's taking his shoes off, and he's just trying to, or whatever, he's just sitting in the hotel room with his shoes off, and you get a feel for this character and for the setting and all that sort of stuff. And then before the story begins in that case, but, before the action really starts. But it's one of those, but there's all these moments that's one of the reasons the later sequels to movies like that suffer so much in a lot of cases. Because they're like, oh, we can't have a quiet moment in this movie anymore. Is the feel in a lot of these.
Yeah. Well, and I think that part of it is that people who are creating movies like that, the sequels anyway, are thinking, well, what did people like the most about this? Okay, well, people told us they liked the gunfights, or they liked the glass shattering, they liked the explosions, and so the next movie, instead of having this great plot line with a fantastic villain, now we've just got double the amounts of explosions and gunfights. And while I still enjoy the sequels a lot of times, it's just like, you never really get back to that perfect storyline of the original.
Right. I think the closest they came to that might have actually been the third one with Sam Jackson. But anyway, that was pretty solid because it was different. Like it was the first one where they diverged from it being basically a single building or complex. And it felt like also it helps that it was written not as a Die Hard movie. So it was written to be its own movie. And then they just changed it to be a Die Hard movie, which is kind of an interesting little tidbit there that really affected how that film works.
Oh, see, and I didn't know that either. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was originally going to be called Simon Says.
No kidding.
And it wasn't going to star John McClane or Bruce Willis, but when they got Bruce Willis, they're like, should we make this a Die Hard movie? And it said yes. I think that's how it worked anyway. Or I'm not sure. Maybe they could only get it made as a Die Hard movie. I actually don't remember. Don't quote me on any of that stuff. I do know the basics of it though.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I actually had a question for you about horror that I want to run past you quick because while I don't write horror, some of the most compelling moments, because we've been talking about the contrast in a movie like Die Hard, where it's like there's this, as well as the plot line and all the stuff, if you just bang, 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 action, or all screams and murders, you don't have a story. You just have like a series of horrific things happening, At least that's how I think about it.
Yeah.
Or you have a series of action scenes, and you don't have a full story in a way. But I was thinking about how there are these moments that can be scary in a book that's not a horror book, because I really like that kind of thing a lot in my own work. And I don't know how to handle it all the time because I don't write that many of these scenes, there's maybe one or two in each book. Or even, but when they do happen, they're some of my favorites. Or the scenes where there's this kind of strong emotional pull, whether it's toward horror or just despair or tragedy. It's always a negative emotion in these scenes that really affect me when I go back through my own stuff. I guess, I don't know, I'm having a hard time making this into a question, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, I do, definitely. And I think that those are the most powerful elements of horror or thrillers or psychological thrillers, anything like that, whether it's television, books, or movies. And there are certain movies, when they're done right. And I'll give you two examples that for me I thought were done right. One of them, and it's an older movie. It's called Signs.
Oh yeah,
and that was by M. Night Shyamalan.
Shyamalan.
Yeah. But anyhow, that movie, I wouldn't call it horror. If anything, it was kind of like a sci-fi, maybe horror light.
Hmm.
It was a PG-13 movie, not a lot of blood and guts, anything like that. However, he crafted it and wrote that movie in such a way that it built up emotionally.
Mm.
And by the climactic scenes, the audience was really emotionally invested in the characters. So when something spooky would happen or when something was revealed, you'd get that kind of oh my gosh moment going on. And of course, that's what he's become known for over
Hmm.
his movie making career. But it's those kind of moments that I think are really powerful. Another one that I watched just in the last couple of years was the John Krasinski film, The Quiet Place or A Quiet Place,
Mm.
and that's the movie where you have to be silent or the monsters will hear you. And it was absolutely fantastic. I thought it was a great monster movie. A lot of plot, a lot of character development, a ton of backstory, just beautiful all the way around. And the scary moments in that really are more from the characters' reactions to what is happening to them. It's less about you seeing a scary monster on screen and saying, "Oh, that's scary."
Hmm.
It's more about you thinking, I can feel what that little girl's feeling right now, or I can feel what that mom or dad is feeling. And that is what is effective horror, is if you can convince the reader to feel what the characters are feeling. Because that's what horror is. Horror is actually the reaction that someone has to something that's horrific or terrible. That's what horror is. It's a person's emotional reaction. Um, and so you've got to be able to tap into that. Otherwise, you've just got blood and guts and somebody maybe that appreciates blood and guts and chainsaws or whatever. But if you don't if you don't have an emotional connection, I mean, you don't have to kill anybody. You don't have to kidnap anybody. I've got one of my stories that touches me the most is a little girl that is scared of a shadow, and it's very emotional. It's very heartbreaking, um, and it's there's no violence whatsoever, but it's just about making that emotional connection. I think, not between you and the reader, but between the reader and the characters.
Oh, well said. That makes so much sense. I think that's probably what I was missing when I've been considering how to kind of design. I mean, I say design, but I don't really plan what I write so much anymore, especially. But a plan for these moments to occur is when it's like the peak of identification, right? Like you reach the low point of the story in a lot of cases for me is when you feel the
Yeah,
most with the character, I think, which is kind of,
yeah.
I mean, that's probably ideal, actually. Maybe I'm doing it right.
Well, yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that approach at all. And I'll tell you what, you had said that it's usually a negative event that
Yeah.
precipitates that, or that draws out this reaction. And I'll tell you what, you're right, but you're right because I think that negative events are easier for us to write.
Ooh.
Um, and that may seem a little bit silly, but let me give you an example of something I watched just yesterday. This was a program that my wife put on Netflix. It was called Skin Decision or something like that. And it's one of these surgical makeover type shows. And in it, a young transgender man um, had top surgery, which is where breast tissue is removed, and it's a very gender affirming surgery. And kind of the climax of this episode, as I'm watching on the couch, is when this young man wakes up. They pull up his bandages so that he can look down at his chest, and he just completely breaks down. And I just completely broke down on the couch
Mm.
watching it. It was such a positive, incredible thing, but damn, it yanked that emotion right out of me so fast. And it was like, and that's a totally different type of storytelling,
Yeah.
doing a documentary style. But it can be done with positive things. We can do it. It's just a hell of a lot more work, I think, to build up to that.
That's fascinating. And you kind of have to come from a low point. Like, you got to be suffering with the problem. And you got to make
Yes.
the character has to be suffering with the problem intensely before they have the change for the better. And that's kind of like that's a climactic twist to kind of a happy ending, even if it's just the end of an episode.
Yeah. Well, and I think the bottom line here, and what anybody should take away from this, if they're listening, is that you have to make your characters suffer.
Yes.
Just make them suffer.
Agreed. You gotta light them up sometimes. And yeah. I don't know any other way to say it.
So what have you been working on, Tim? What are you writing right now?
I just started a new book today, actually. As we record this, I started the third book in my Demon Hunter series. I'm editing the second book now, and I just started writing the third book. The first book was called Demon Scroll, and that's been out for a while. The second one's called Shadow Prince, and that should be out shortly after this episode airs, I think. No promises, though. I don't have a pre-order or anything, so it'll be out in August. And then the third book, hopefully I'll be able to get that out by the end of September, is called Well Country, and I just started it today. It's going to be a big book, but I think I can do it. I think I have it. Because this is epic fantasy. One of the main characters in the series is this immortal guy, but he's like the only immortal guy. In this fantasy world, there's like two of them. But every immortal has a mission, and that's what this third book is really focusing on him, because he was one of my main characters in both the previous books, but he was also not the hero in either of the previous books. But I've always seen him as the hero of this series, so I think that's kind of it's almost a twist in the way the series is told, because he's not the hero of the first two books. there's other heroes in there. It's almost episodic, like he's the mentor character in those two. Anyway,
Oh, that's cool. I love it when you're able to bring back a character in a different role than a later book.
I mean, the funny thing was, this is one of the only times this has been planned all along. Like I was like, oh yeah, he's definitely got to be the hero, but we can't just start out with people understanding everything about this guy, because he's got this 300-year history of his life. It's insane. There's a lot there. So I wanted to build up gradually to that point.
That's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, what are you working on?
Well, I just released a book in June called Pathosis, and it's it's very fitting for the times we're in now. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic type book. It's a pandemic that's starting out in Florida and sweeping up through America, and there's all sorts of kind of violence and bugs and germs and good nerdy stuff in there, as well as a very, very cool young protagonist that's fighting her way out of Florida. So it's really a lot of fun, and it's strange because I actually wrote this years ago. This is a re-release of this book because when I initially wrote it and self-published it, there's a lot of spelling errors, there's a lot of revisions that need to be made, and now I had a great publisher who picked it up and cleaned it up for me, and now it's nice and new and polished and ready for everyone to read and be terrified by.
Beautiful. Where can people find your works? All of them on the internet out there.
Oh my goodness. Well,
not all of them, but the top. Name the places. You don't have to name every work. You have a lot of stuff.
Well, my old high school reports are no, I don't know. No, Amazon, of course. I think we're all on Amazon now. If you type in LaVelle, LaVelle, you'll find me. Also, if you go to my publisher's website, freefuriespress.com, and just either look through their authors tabs. There's lots of great people in there, or look for me, Jason LaVelle. You'll find me in there. And I've got lots of books for people to check out, like paranormal. I've got horror. I've got the post-apocalyptic book there. So there's kind of something for everybody who likes a little bit of darkness.
Wonderful. Thanks for being on the show, Jason. It's been a lot of fun.
It has been great. Thank you, Tim.
And as for this show, you can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com. You can find me on amazon.com, on my books, I should say. I'm not there. I don't work at amazon.com, but my books are there. So, yeah, you can find those books there. I'm going to be coming out with the sequels to most of the existing book ones this year. That's a promise, and I plan to keep it. So I have 4 series that I started, and God help me, but I'm going to try to finish some of them this year. Well, not finish, but continue them this year. Continue all of them.
You can do it.
I can. I've got one in the Shadow Prince should be out soon. I mentioned that earlier. That's the next book that'll probably be out, and yeah. So we got, but there's so many others. We got 10 Liars. I've just been reading 10 Liars for the Magic and Mayhem and Machine in Michigan convention that's happening online. It's already in the past when you hear this, because I'm a terrible podcaster, I guess. But anyway, not as bad as I am as a panelist, though, because I totally forgot what day it was on at first. I thought it was a month early, which is, at least I'm safe that way. So I was all peaked up last month, but then I realized it wasn't until the end of July. Anyway, so that's probably, I speak from the future here. That's a ton of fun. So, if you can see my reading of 10 Liars, which is a gun mage fantasy novel, I may share that link somewhere if I can find it. So, thanks for listening, everybody, and I've waffled on long enough. Thanks again, Jason, and have a good one, everybody.
That tears it.